Hi, my name is Abby Molo, and I'm an instructor in fashion merchandising at Mercyhurst University. And in terms of my reactions to this film, I wish it would have come out about a year earlier, because for those students, and I see many of them here, who was in my international fashion class last spring, and I can see a bunch of them over here and here, we talked a lot about this subject, and I felt terrible because at the end of every day, I wanted to tell my students, it's okay to love fashion, it's okay to love to dress well and to feel good in your own skin and to feel good in the clothes you wear. But I hope the one thing, one message I convey to them is just think about your actions and just think about how strong what we do affects the entire world. So we had a fabulous time in that class, and this film is just such a remarkable composition that is totally relative to not just the fashion industry, but the world today. So it is such a huge and important film, and I hope you all enjoyed it. I know I did. I know myself that the first time I watched it, I felt terrible for my husband because I watched it and I was telling Dan, I was like, I just feel so saddened by all of this. But then at the end, it just has such a positive message, and it's such a good message of inspiration. And even though I don't have children yet, I would hope that the day I do have children, they're going to be born into a world that has a bunch of positive change, especially in an industry that I love so much and that I've spent my entire adult life just learning about and just feeling such a strong connection to. So there's that.
My name is Amy Weaver-Collis, and I am the department chair of the fashion merchandising program at Mercyhurst. I've seen this film several times, and it chokes me up every single time. So it's tough to watch, knowing what my profession is, and sometimes almost, a little bit of guilt, because so much of recruiting students to the program, you kind of highlight to them the glitz, the glam, everything that most young people think of the fashion industry. But you do definitely have to pause and unfortunately expose to them that there is a very dark side to our industry, but it doesn't have to be that way. And them as students can make the choice to get involved. It's up to them what aspect of the industry that they want to go into after graduation. And who knows, maybe this film will cause them to pause and think and say, well, maybe there was one aspect, maybe I just wanted to go into the buying aspect. But if you are in a sourcing position, you do have control to look at who are we buying from, where are we sourcing these materials from, and are they in an ethical manner? And those individuals in sourcing do actually get to travel to those countries. So I do think that there's so many opportunities to make change for the better. And it really does kind of start and end with all of us as consumers as well. So once again, I get that, I was a poor college student at one time too, we all were. And, so yes, the Forever 21 and H&M's is very, it's something that's tantalizing and something that they gravitate towards. And by no means am I going to sit up here and say that you should boycott those sort of places. But it's true that if you can really sit back and say, do I really need this? Even if you cut back the least bit, it would make, in the grand scheme of things, a huge difference.
Hi, I'm Brian Ripley. I'm a professor of political science at Mercyhurst, and I think it's a really powerful film. And to me, of course, because I'm interested in politics, it kind of raises this fault line I think we have in politics between, I would say, the trade optimists and the trade skeptics out there. And they tell two very different kinds of stories. The U.S. after World War II was a leader in the world trying to make sure that more and more countries were involved in trade, lowering barriers, removing tariffs, organizing different trade pacts and so forth, with the idea that you can produce a lot more, all the kinds of good things that go together, economic growth and vitality and competition and so forth. And you see part of that story from some of the people that are interviewed in this film. But then, you know, you see also the case pretty strongly for the trade skeptics who wonder if some of the deals that we have made, some of the connections and relationships that have come out of this are really, as the film title says, kind of masking the true cost of these things. You know, and in this year's, you know, not to get political partisan about anything, but you know, even in this year's presidential campaign, we're hearing these kinds of issues being raised about the sorts of deals that we can or should make. The current debate about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, for example, a new trade deal that there's quite a bit of division about whether this is the kind of deal you can make. Can you add provisions that protect human rights, that protect environmental concerns, that protect wages, and still get a deal out of it that countries are willing to sign on to? And I think my final point would be, and a lot of what this film talks about is not even about governments, right? But about what kinds of codes of conduct corporations might make, what kinds of choices consumers could make to make those kinds of preferences. So, you know, maybe it's not even going to be in the hands of political leaders. Maybe it's more consumers and retail industry experts to make these choices for us. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I think for one thing, we're looking at this through the lens of the American experience. This has been going on over there for generations. I hate to use the term breeding, but they have so many people that have had children. They have whole communities that are brought up around these factories, and that's all that they do is for these factories. If they didn't have the factory jobs, it's not like they could go out and get another job. This is what they do because this is all there is there for them to do. If there suddenly were no factories, there's no social network there for them to fall back on. The other thing I'd like to point out is that when I'm looking at things like this, in a way, I'm looking back at the way the United States was a couple hundred years ago. We had things just like this. I'm looking at Cambodia, where they were opening fire on the people that were trying to unionize. That was right here in the United States a couple hundred years ago. A lot of people don't realize that the Pennsylvania State Police were not set up by Harrisburg, were not set up by the government. They were set up by the mine owners as leg breakers and strike breakers to come in. And that's what they did. They came in, they broke some legs, they burnt down some houses, and then they went to another place where they needed strike breakers at. It happened before. It can happen again. It's happening right now in Cambodia.
No, I would agree. And those are some really, really good points. I've read some things, you know, to your first point. Just that when women go to work at these apparel factories, it's almost kind of the analogy of what we think of American young women wanting to go to New York City. It's kind of the city of big lights, big opportunities. So although, yes, we feel bad for the situation that they're in, some of them, if the alternative was working, you know, in rural areas of China, you know, farming day in and day out, then you're right. To them, you know, moving to the city and working in these factory settings to them is a step up in life. So.
But you saw that, again, a couple hundred years ago in this country, where people couldn't afford to raise their kids. They would take them out to relatives at the farm, or if they didn't have that, they would drop them off in an orphanage and say, that's it, we can't afford more than one kid, you better go. And yet we managed to get through that in various ways, and in some cases there was a lot of bloodshed involved.
I like how in the movie, one of the gentlemen, I think it was, he made a point to say that, or no, it was a lady who said, working in an apparel factory is not a bad job. It's not a dangerous job, and it's not. I mean, if you've sewn, I think, you know, yes, there is always danger of pricking your finger with the needle or burning yourself on an iron, but by and large, it is not a dangerous job. But I really like the conviction that they just said that it's not a bad thing to dream and to aspire, and it's not a bad thing. It's a wonderful thing to have a good, honest job in an apparel factory. I just like the conviction that they said that we need to do better, and if we as consumers can spend $1 more on a t-shirt, if that means that the apparel workers, most of them are young women, and we're just trying to have a better life, not just for them, but for their families, well then, shouldn't we want to do that? And I think we do. I mean, people are, maybe I'm an optimist, but I believe people are inherently good. Many of us just don't know the consequences of our actions. And films like this that really help us understand that we are all interconnected, and that such a simple little thing like paying an extra $1 for a t-shirt can have such a global impact.
But it won't happen like that. They made the point in the movie that just 3 cents added on the price of a t-shirt would double their salaries. But even doing that, that 3 cents wouldn't end up in their pocket. It would end up in the factory owners or somebody in the middleman. I'd be glad to pay that, but that's not the way it happens.
It seems to me that things only get done when money is behind it. And I guess an example of that was recently in the news across the country was the particular southern state that decided it would be okay to have people discriminate against gays and lesbians, basically. And there were so many big companies that said, you do that, we're not doing business with you. It's only when that happens that this is going to change. And it did for a while when it became known that Nike did use this and this and this slave labor, basically. And then Nike said, oh, well, that can't happen again. But so I think you have to connect the people really profit from it as one of the solutions here. And if you could say, who are you making these clothes for? I think what's happened since that time was that Nike says, oh, we don't know who does this. You know, we buy the things and it's all made there and the management is there. Maybe to go to what you said, yes, it's dangerous to be in a sewing factory if you're in a paper-thin building that's ready to come down, as 1,000 people found out in Rana Plaza. But nobody's taking any responsibility for that. Today is probably the first day I've felt any sense of complicity with this. I mean, I think we are a throwaway society, and I think they call it fast fashion. Okay, I'd never heard that term before. And I'd never seen all of the dump. You know, I've just always thought optimistically that, hey, it becomes a big enough problem, they're going to put it all into something and it's going to come out, you know, in some form that we can use again. And I still think that's part of the ingenuity type thing. Just like I think with global warming, you know, when we're doing enough and more people are getting worried about this for themselves, but also for who's coming next. There's a tipping point. The tipping point hasn't been reached in this issue, but nobody owns it. That makes us feel responsible. I mean, now when I buy a garment, I'll be thinking.
No, and I agree, and I think a big problem, like you mentioned with Nike, is the use of so many contract factories, being that these big companies that are profiting the most do not own those factories, so they do feel that they're not held responsible. So, you know, and it's not as easy as then, I guess, from the government standpoint of saying, okay, well, if you want to manufacture something, then you need to own your own factory. Undoubtedly, if that was the case, I do think that, you know, it definitely wouldn't fix the problem overnight, but that is probably the biggest problem, hands down.
You know, when they said that with meat, one of the big things was going to be, you're going to be able to know where this animal was raised and what's happened to it until it got to your plate, essentially. If that were true and you said any garment has to have not just made in China, not just made in Bangladesh, but something more that gives us the path from where it was at least put together, you know, the factories. It should say what factory it's from. And you know, unless we see that, we feel helpless.
Just to respond to that, I feel like I've seen that there are companies coming out that are really promoting, like, we want to show you the factories that we're, you know, building this clothing in. I mean, I think about Facebook tells me everything, but there's a company called Everlane, and I read all about them, and they talk about all their factories, and like, when you buy a belt from us, it's coming from this factory, and these are the people who work there, and these are the conditions. But anyway, that's just a response to you. 2 questions. One is, what part of Mercyhurst's curriculum addresses some of these issues? And then the second part of my question is for you guys and for you here, this seems like a really, a very female-driven industry and a very female-affected problem. I mean, I guess as an American woman, I, just like anybody else, am like interested in fashion, and we have a lot of young women going into this field. So what kind of responsibility do we feel as women? Because a lot of the people that are starting these fair trade companies and doing this amazing work, it's these wonderful women, and there are men too, of course. I'm not discounting men, but I feel like there's this female thing going on. So I'm curious about your thoughts there, and if you have any thoughts on that too. What brought you into fashion? And do you feel, as a woman, that you can impact the lives of these women in these third world countries, really, that are making the clothing that you're designing and hopefully selling and buying and all of that stuff?
Okay, well, to answer the first part of your question about what part of our curriculum touches on this, in several classes across our curriculum, we definitely make a point to touch on, like I said, what I refer to as the dark side of the industry, whether it is sweatshops, counterfeit goods, which are often made in sweatshop settings. But we do have an entire course called Global Trends in the Fashion Industry. It used to be called International Fashion Industry, that students can take in this elective course. And then, like I said, it's touched on in a lot of the classes. In fact, our entire fashion journalism class is here. So a class that you wouldn't necessarily would think have anything to do with this topic, obviously is something that they can have write about and have thoughts on, because that's just it. You can probably tell from this film that there are just so many layers to this, and so many angles you can take, and fingers you can point in various directions. So it's definitely very multifaceted.
Well, I'm in a different department. Obviously, I teach courses in international relations, global issues, that sort of thing. But Abby and I had a chance to collaborate last year on a project looking at, I'll let her say more about it, but looking at ways in which industries might be able to use the code of conduct to make the suppliers more accountable. But is that a substitute for having political systems or governments make those? Who can make the producers accountable, I guess? Thinking of the point you're making before about if we knew more about where our stuff comes from. But how many of us really spend a lot of time even knowing, like looking at the label to begin with, what country it's in, say nothing of what the path is? I mean, that's what of us do now because we're more aware of this. But can codes of conduct that are promoted by NGOs or corporations do the job of policing this industry?
To follow along with what Brian or Dr. Ripley was saying, a part of our project, he took care of a lot of the non-government organization and the political science angles, but him and I definitely collaborated and really investigated these third-party organizations, one of which is called WRAP, the Worldwide Responsible Accredited Production. It's quite a mouthful. But this organization just looks at organizations and invites organizations to become certified. And basically what this certification says is we follow all of these codes of conduct, which the companies have absolutely no say in what these codes of conduct are. WRAP, or the organization of WRAP, says these are the things that you have to follow. And if you want to be WRAP certified, you have to prove to us you are following them. And what's really fascinating is WRAP and other organizations like WRAP are just one of the many ways that can affect the change that we are all here tonight discussing. And going along with your second question about, this is, I don't want to say only a female problem. It is a large female problem because, as you saw, so many of the people represented in the film were women. But it's so much more than that, because while we are the women, we are the ones, so many of which are in the factories, there are men too, and you saw them. The gentlemen were having, they were in the dirtiest of conditions. They're the ones working in the leather tanneries, so just amongst many of the other dirtier jobs. And of course, as gentlemen, since they have a lot of the upper body strength, they do a lot of the heavy lifting too, which is also just very debilitating. So it's easy to say that it is only a female problem, and we can definitely say that, but it is most definitely a male and female problem. It's just seen in different ways. Whitney?
I think for speaking as, 20-year-old people, we are so like into social media and like getting to know our brands, we obsess over clothes and we're always on our phones and on our computers, and we know like what we're buying. We know when we walk into Forever 21 that you can get a pair of jeans for $10 that are gonna turn your life blue, and it's because of how they're made. And I think that us like learning all this stuff and getting a job with someone after graduation, like we know where those clothes are coming from, and we have more of a voice than maybe like an older generation who isn't like so caught up in social media and shopping and the thrill of all that. So I think that we are really aware. It's just going to take a good 10 years for all our voices to be heard for the things to be done.
Well, being born and raised in a third world country, this film really hit it home. And for me, seeing this video, it makes me think about my country. And talking about what we said about young women going to the city and taking a big step working in these sweatshops, make me think about even relatives that I have that work in sweatshops and the terrible working conditions that they're into. But there's not a lot of options in third world countries. When people do not get a proper education, there's not a lot to do. It's that or getting into prostitution and getting into terrible conditions, in living conditions that are really unhumane. So for me, this is an inspiration to us as people in America, in a first world country, to do something, even if it takes $1 more in a t-shirt, in some pants. It really should make you think that people in third world countries are really suffering, and this should be an inspiration for everyone in this room and for your relatives, for your children.
Yeah, going off from her point, I also believe that I was also raised in a third world country, but I strongly believe that after the point of only being driven by money, people are also driven by experiences. Just as the old woman in the cotton field said, at first we could see how she was really positive about all the chemicals and all that, but after her husband died due to, well, she said that you couldn't strongly correlate it, but you could relatively unite the points that it was because of the chemical problems that he died. It doesn't say it in the video, but I strongly believe that she stopped doing the chemical thing because of the impact that her husband's death brought to her life. So I think that as viewing from a point of view of a third world country, I see clothes in a different point of view because I know the suffering. Because it's not something that they tell me about. It's not something I watch on a movie, but it's something I live. So I think that's the difference. And having the opportunity of watching this video, I think you should really feel very lucky because it opens your eyes to a reality that not everybody is open to. And I hope it really changes my mind.
The layer of the question that I would like to address is that the rottenness that our capitalistic system has fostered on humanity. Because the profit motive drives industry, drives the legal system, and it's amoral. It has no regard for people and their well-being. So that's the level underlying all of this love of looking wonderful in the fashion industry, and even within the political process today, or the election, where you do have capitalism, profit, money, drives us. So for us to have human values and how we can impose them on companies and have them in a more moral way instead of being amoral and just look at the bottom line and get rid of anything that would destroy profit. That question, there's two conflicting ways of behavior. To be a human being, I don't need to have profit in order to be a human being. I need values. And to somehow infuse them into society today is what I see our most difficult human problem that we have.
I was just curious, with the accountability and everything, I mean, it reminds me of, you're talking about putting labels on clothes. And I think we all know, like with food, the more labels you put on something, the more you're going to have lobbyists and laws, and there's going to be, all that sort of thing. And that can happen fine and dandy in the U.S., but on an international scale, out there right now, what agency would be considered a watchdog or an overseer on these things? Be like the UN or?
I'm thinking if
The ILO at least looks at it from a labor, the ILO. The International Labor Organization is primarily the agency that kind of looks at human labor rights as far as, that's concerned.
But it would just come down to the corporation itself and its ethics and code of responsibility.
Yes, most definitely. And I do think, I thought it was interesting that in the film that they featured a couple designers or companies based out of the UK, because what I have seen is definitely certain countries have kind of taken a more proactive approach to truly look at exactly that. Where are the clothes being made, in what conditions? Prime example, we have an alum of ours who worked in New York in Manhattan, but actually took a job out of London working for Burberry, and she's part of a team over there, and their goal is to kind of look at the sustainability of the Burberry brand, and they actually have goals, and they had a set timeline of 3 years in order to get the company to where they want to be. And we don't see a whole lot of American-based companies doing that. Yes, they have a department of, that kind of oversees it. But once again, most of us agree that it feels kind of like smoke and mirrors. It's kind of that somebody has a job title that sounds like they're supposed to be overseeing this. But at the end of the day, they're getting pressure internally saying, well, you have to make this profit margin, which, goes back to kind of our capitalistic model here.
Well, just only to say that a lot of these practices are technically illegal in the countries where they're taking place. So it's not like if you look at the laws in the books, well, a lot of countries have good laws protecting these things, but then it comes to the enforcement, the accountability, the awareness, and the temptation is just so great, obviously, to be able to produce a product that you can export, and so people look the other way, even with regard to their own laws and their own policies. It's a really good question you're asking. Like, well, okay, who should be in charge of making sure that they're living up to their own laws and their own responsibilities? But there's a myriad of different kind of governance agencies out there that offer a piece of it, but no one really seems to be the central coordinator of it.
It seems to me we give so much foreign aid, and we tie strings to it. I mean, we spend so much of our capital in the forms of money, and our people dying over here in wars, and it just seems to do nothing but produce death and bad will. But it seems to me that may be a way, as far as actually taking people from here to make sure things happen there, and that those dumps get done, and that the buildings are safe. I don't know why, as part of our helping countries, we can't insist that these things be done instead of giving money and everybody gets rich and owns palaces. If we have to be actively involved, I think, in making sure that the use of the money goes to the need, like exactly what's happening there. We think of what's happening in Detroit or outside of Detroit with the lead in the water. That, you know, over there they just went like, what are you talking about? That's one of 20 million chemicals that we have. And you see their faces and their cancers and the mental and physical trauma inflicted on children who only live a certain amount of time with misery. You know, if there was even one spot in the United States that suffered like that, it would become a major embarrassment in our story. Maybe we need to send some people over there for your journalism class. Maybe, you know, that sort of thing, eco-journalism maybe. There needs to be eco-journalism, proactive and exposure, just like these documentaries do.
It's true. I mean, it's from a broadcast media standpoint, you know, they like to show the, you know, glossy magazine kind of images because they know people want to see this. I mean, it's hard to see this. You know, there's many times you kind of want to look away. You know, it goes back to Whitney's point about social media. These aren't the images you see on social media, and if they were, you know, we'd probably see at least a little change, if not a lot.
I think that if an industry really took this on, just say like certain other issues like the ones I pointed out with the state that was going to allow discrimination, and then the governor vetoed it. He was all for it until the big companies said, we're not going to do business with you. And one of the things I remember was when Arizona, I think it was, maybe it was another state, wouldn't recognize the Martin Luther King holiday. I know our church pulled their convention out, the Episcopal Church pulled theirs out. It's money that speaks. So the real thing to do would be to incentivize the industry here that's profiting from this, and then really give them kudos and more business to send the business to those responsible American corporations. And that's a positive thing to do, and it's where we can spend our dollars as votes, so that if one of the companies says, we're going to make sure that our factories, the ones that produce for us, are going to be clean. We're going to send a crew over here to help with this, that, and the other. And if enough people got together to do it, half of it is knowledge and the other half of it is publicizing it and galvanizing it. Because we see that happening. Gay marriage wouldn't be here if enough hadn't happened in the last 10 years. And then it just zoomed ahead. It was just all of a sudden younger people who are more responsible aren't going to put up with it.
In terms of not just the younger generations, but generations as a whole, really seeing this and understanding the consequences of our actions, I think one of the best things that has been done in recent years is Livia Firth and her Green Carpet Challenge, because Livia Firth is a gorgeous woman with an equally gorgeous husband who is a celebrity, and she is in the magazine, she's on the red carpet, and she is a very important figurehead for this movement. And the fact that a woman of her celebrity status can see the problems emerging or that have emerged in this industry and called attention to it and said, look at the problem that we have created. Let me use my status to make a change. And she has encouraged multitudes of celebrities to wear either organic gowns or garments that have been made in an ethical way, in a fair trade way. And so just by having these major figureheads like she and other important designers like Stella McCartney to get the word out there and to say this is a problem, and look, someone in my circle of friends can affect change. Come along with me and join the movement. And I think, especially in this country, people really have responded to that, and I think people have been increasingly responding to her message. So that is one way I know that people have been really hearing the true cost, is what you call it.
All right, well, let's panel, everyone.